welcome to our third workshop. I'm so excited to have you all here for this workshop. Our workshop's title is When is the Right Time to Switch Jobs? This is a really awesome topic because we've got an amazing guest speaker for you all tonight. And the reason why this is an awesome topic is because this is probably something you've faced or thought about in your work experience. Maybe it's been something that's been on your mind recently. Maybe it's something that's been on your mind in the past, but it's definitely something that's probably crossed your mind. When is the right time to switch jobs? This could be because your company culture is not valuing you, or maybe you've got a bad situation with your supervisor, or maybe you're just kind of bored. You don't feel like you've got any upward momentum, or for any other reason for why you might want to switch jobs. This is the workshop for you to give you insight as to when actually is the right time to switch jobs. How can you go about identifying when that right time is, and how can you put yourself in the best position so then you are properly leveraging the opportunity at hand. Now, one thing we know is that one of the best ways to go about raising your pay level and your title, your actual status within a company's level, is by switching jobs. It's just a fact. What we've observed in the data is that people are less likely to get promoted by staying at the same company year over year. They are much more likely to get promoted faster by switching jobs. In fact, some of the things we see quite often is people leaving a company, going to a different company, getting some experience, and then coming back at a much elevated role than somebody who stayed at that company that entire time. So it's something to definitely consider and think about, but it is not all about switching jobs, and it is really all about when is the right time to switch jobs, because there are sometimes moves that are diagonal moves, there are sometimes moves that are directly vertical moves, there are sometimes horizontal moves that you believe will help you move up vertically even faster, and sometimes the motivation isn't necessarily to move up faster or to make more money. Sometimes it's to get more balance with your life, or sometimes the motivation is to work on something that is more of a calling to you, something that you really are passionate about. It's not about the money anymore. It's okay, whatever your motivations are. This workshop will really shed light on when the right time is to switch jobs. Now, we're going to cover a few key things that you can do to prepare for your mentor relationship and for how to actually go about preparing for switching jobs. And obviously, we've got an amazing guest speaker for you all this evening. But I wanted to talk a little bit about work orientation. Work orientation, that's that measurement that we've leveraged to help match you with your mentor. And this is something that plays a big role into job changes because we know that, one, your work orientation is fluid. Work orientation is how you view your work. So some people view the work as a job, some people view their work as a career, some people view their work as a calling. If you've logged into your Ambition and Motion dashboard, you'll see that triangle, you'll see where your dot is on the triangle. But it's fluid, meaning that your dot could have changed between January when you took the assessment and right now. And that's, by the way, completely okay. That's completely normal. But what we know is that what motivates you at work will absolutely determine how and when and why you will want to switch jobs. So back to what I was saying earlier, if you're job oriented, that's, by the way, completely okay. It means you're motivated by work-life balance. Your decision to change jobs might be because you're working 80 hours a week and you just can't keep doing it anymore. You got to be home with family. You got things in your life that you want to do more of, and your work is not allowing you to do that. So your motivation is not necessarily more money or a higher status. It could be, hey, I want to work 40 hours a week, or I want to work 30 hours a week, I want to work 20 hours a week. I want to do something that can pay me a little bit of money, allow me to get by, but ultimately allow me to relax and wind down a bit. And that's okay. If you're career oriented, that's where we see a lot of the stereotypical reasons for moving, because it helps you work up the corporate ladder. It helps you get promoted faster. It helps you get a higher pay raise. It helps you learn new skills. Moving jobs is definitely something that's advantageous for someone who's career oriented because it allows you to try new things. But then the key is, how can you be strategic about that? Our guest speaker will help us with that this evening. And then the last part is your calling. So if you're calling oriented, you might want to switch jobs because you're working for this company and it's just not doing it for you. You're like, yeah, it's fine. The impact on the world that we're making is fine, but it's just not calling to your heart and the impact you want to make on the world. And we end up realizing to ourselves, shoot, we've only got a finite amount of days, years, hours on this earth. We might as well be spending it doing something that we're really passionate about, that's really, we feel like is making a positive difference. We can always get more money, but we cannot get more time. For us, if you're calling oriented, you might determine, you know what, I am switching because I want to be doing something that's meaningful to me. Then the key is, how can you be strategic and put your priorities on a pedestal to ensure that you are getting what you want out of it. Don't get sidetracked by the things that do not motivate you. It can be easy, let's say if you're calling oriented, to start looking for new jobs because you want to find something that you're more passionate about. And then maybe you get 3 different job offers and you end up making a decision based on the amount of money. That would be crazy, but it happens all the time because ultimately you're making this job switch because you wanted to do something you were more passionate about. Ultimately, if you get, let's say, 3 offers and you're calling oriented, the company, the entity, the organization that is the most impactful to you really should be the one that wins out. At the end of the day, sure, your quantitative metrics in terms of how much money you need to be making should be appeased, but after that, you should be looking at impact if that's something that motivates you. If you're job oriented, what's the type of role that's going to give you the most work-life balance? You might have 3 job offers. One is, asking you to work 50 hours a week. One is asking you to work on Saturdays and Sundays, and one says, you know what, hey, you're going to only work 35 hours a week. You're only going to do that over 3 days, Monday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Thursdays through Sundays are yours. That might be the thing that you want. You might be, hey, I'm cool with working extended hours on 3 days of the week to get a bunch of hours, make money, and then, the rest of it's essentially a weekend. That could be the way that you perceive work. Whatever it is, make sure that what motivates you, what is the most important factor, is the highest and the most highest thing on your pedestal of what is your decision-making process. So that is just the thing that I really want to stress when it comes to when is the right time to switch jobs, making sure that your priorities are aligned with where you want to go. Now, we're about halfway through the mentor program this spring. Hopefully you've met with your mentor. Hopefully you've already met with your mentor twice. I want you to make the most out of this program. Take advantage of it. Meet with your mentor as many times as you possibly can, and hopefully get yourself to where you want to be. Now, one thing that I really want to stress is that if you are not able to get in contact with your mentor, if you're having any issues, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We can answer any questions, comments, concerns, or issues you have with your mentor. Or if you've got kudos, if things are going great and amazing, send it to us. We love hearing those stories. I mean, the positive just makes us feel good that we're making a positive impact. It makes us feel really special that we've done something. So I know often, it's, as the term goes, if it bleeds, it leads. We only want to share the things that are negative in our world. Share the positive stuff. It makes us feel better about what we are doing. We love to hear it. So let's jump in. Now, the one thing that we've talked about in previous workshops that I really want to stress, and I stress it every single time, that is strategy, story, and state. Those are the 3 keys to success in this program. And I'll talk about them in reverse order. State is the most important thing. Physically, what is your state? Physically, where are you at? Physically, what is going on in your world? I don't care if you've had a horrible day, if you're stressed out, if your work is frustrating you. I mean, the whole point of this program is that hopefully we can get your work situation to a point where it's not frustrating you. But regardless of it, when you're going into a mentor meeting, what is your state saying about you? If you're coming in with a negative mentality, if you're coming in with a negative state, you're going to give off negative vibes. Then people are not going to want to help you or be around you. But on the flip side, if you get yourself into a positive state, if you're doing power poses every morning, if you're getting yourself up, moving, working around, and just getting yourself overall in a good feeling and a good mood, because your emotions, by the way, your emotions drive your emotions. You can get yourself into an emotionally positive state by moving around and getting your body going, getting your blood pumping. I tell you that's something that I've learned from Tony Robbins. It's an extremely valuable tool. Make sure that you're leveraging it, but your state is so critical. So what I want to do right now is I want to get you into state. You're about to learn some amazing things from our guest speaker this evening. I want to make sure that you are taking the most out of it and retaining as much information as you can. So what I want you to do is I want you to stand up and I want you to shake it out. I want you to shimmy loose. I want you to scream at the top of your lungs. On the count of 3, scream at the top of your lungs. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out. Let it loose. Let it go. You got nothing to lose. I don't care who's looking at you weirdly, if you're at work or if you're in an office or if you're at home. I don't care what's going on. You've got nothing to lose, because at the end of the day, it's about how much are you taking from this program. If you're making the most out of this, you've invested yourself in this program. I want you to make the most out of this. So get yourself into a state conducive for being successful. This goes for any scenario you're going into at work, whether that be a mentor meeting, a colleague meeting, a supervisor meeting. Get yourself into state. Do what you need to do to get yourself prepared physically, because you will then be much more likely to be successful. Now, the next key is your story. What is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be or not to be successful? I want to think about this in a different way. I want to ask you a question. I would love if you could post your comments in the comments section. But what is a feeling that you want other people to feel about you when you meet them? The reason why I ask this is because it helps us and forces us to be intentional about how we want others to feel about us. Because ultimately, if we're intentional intentional about how we want other people to feel about us, we are much more likely to actually convey that feeling in them. If we're thinking to ourselves, man, I would love if people thought I was confident, or I would love if people thought I was knowledgeable, or I would love if people thought I was kind or empathetic, whatever it is, post in the comment section. I'd love to learn what is a feeling that you would love to convey in other people. But what this does, by being intentional about what feeling we are trying to convey in other people, we can now start taking actions and start doing things that help reinforce that feeling in their minds about who we are, what we're doing. If we can be intentional about how we want other people to feel about us, we are much more likely to be successful. That plays directly into that story thing about why we'll be successful. Because sometimes I think it might be easy to perceive, oh, story is just about being confident. Story is just about telling yourself why you're going to be successful. And it is. That's a big part of it. But the other big component to having a good story is understanding every component of how other people interact with you. So you don't want to come in bombastically overconfident and just not being humble. It's about being intentional about how you want other people to feel about you. If you can identify that feeling, post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. That will really help you in terms of having the right story. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things you are going to do to best prepare yourself for this circumstance? Now, our workshop tonight is about when is the right time to switch jobs. I'm a big proponent of SWOT analysis. SWOT analysis stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. One thing that I would love for you to do, it's great to start a routine every month. Identify what is the strength of staying in my company, what is the weakness of staying in my company, what are the opportunities of moving to a different company, what is the threat of moving to a different company. Identify that. When the opportunities and the weaknesses are greater than the strengths and the threats, it is time to move. That helps you do a personal audit of where you were, where you are, and where you'd like to be. If you don't do that, it can be difficult to know when is the right time to switch. It can be easy to fall into a trap of just doing the same monotonous work day in and day out. By doing consistent SWOT analyses and by doing it monthly, you're much more likely to have a greater understanding of when the right time is to switch. Now, the last thing that I would love and really implore you to try is to share what you're learning about with somebody else. It could be another person in this program. It could be a friend. It could be a significant other. It could be anybody, a family member, whatever. Because what we've learned is that when people who participate in this program share something that they learned about this program with at least 20 other people, their likelihood of achieving their goals in this program increases incrementally. We hypothesize that a big reason for this is that they're teaching other people these skills that they're learning. And when we know that when you teach somebody else something else, it is much more likely to reinforce in your mind. Maybe it could also be the law of attraction. By sharing with other people the things that you're learning in this program, especially your goals, people are now thinking about you for those outcomes. Maybe they're thinking, you know what, Jane Doe, John Doe would be a perfect fit for this thing, and they're going to introduce you. The point I'm making is that when you share this program and what you're learning with more people, the likelihood that you're going to achieve your goals increases substantially. And also, I mean, for future programs, we're opening up our enrollment for the fall program. If you could encourage other people to participate, we would love to get more people involved, because we know that if you could be an ambassador for this, we are much more likely to make a better impact and a bigger impact on more people. So if you could help encourage more people to enroll in the program, we would love to have that, especially to have your support in that endeavor. So I'm so excited to jump into our guest speaker this evening. We're talking about when is the right time to switch jobs. If you've got any questions about anything at all, any comments, any concerns, any issues with anything, please email us at support@ambition-in-motion.com. I'm so excited for what you all are about to learn this evening. I'm so excited for you to embark on the next half of the Ambition in Motion Mentor program with your mentor. I look forward to seeing what you are all able to accomplish. Let's get going to the next part of this workshop. Hey everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I'm so excited to dive into our topic of when is the right time to switch jobs. This is a very fascinating topic right now because we got COVID, people are switching roles. We got this great resignation thing, great reshuffle thing going on right now where people are actively switching jobs. And I mean, I personally have seen this because I run these executive mastermind groups, and we even have a handful of leaders that are switching roles and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's not the right time. I mean, I've heard from a lot of leaders where they'll switch a role and then all of a sudden they're like, dang, I wish I was in my previous role because sometimes I'll hear, oh, I switched a role to be in a senior C-suite level position,
but I was at this startup, and then I realized that the lack of organization at this startup was not something I was prepared for. And now it's like, almost, I wish I had more stability. I've seen that happen a ton of times. I've also seen a lot of leaders and professionals in general switch roles, and it was a great fit. And it was a great move. But this topic today is all about when is the right time to switch jobs. We've got a great guest with us here this evening. We've got Kit Legg. Kit is a tenacious seller doer with demonstrated expertise in identifying, developing, and implementing energy solutions. He's currently the vice president and electrical engineer at Engineering Consultants. Kit, thanks for being here.
Yeah, no problem.
So I love to start out with, what was your professional journey? How did you get to this point in time in your life and in your career?
Yeah, sure. Try to do the Reader's Digest version. So if I stray too much, you'll have to bring me back on course.
Well, I guess I would love to emphasize, when you made a switch in roles and jobs, what were the key contributing factors for why you made the switch? And then once you got into the new role, was that a good switch? Was it a bad switch? What was, like, surprising? What was good surprising, bad surprising? I'd love to learn all the factors.
Perfect. So as an electrical engineer, I started out at a very big utility company down in California. It was a good start, had a good mentor there, good leader, developed a good relationship that continues to this day. But that was, almost 20 years ago now. And after about a year of being there, he ultimately left to a different department, and the utility was going through a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which meant that they got to stay in business, but they had to reduce their costs and all that stuff. And so I got let go in a first in or last in, first out scenario, where I was just let go. And I was then out living in California, San Francisco, with no job. And it was tough to find my next position because I had very limited experiences, about a year. And the utility had a policy of not giving references whatsoever. So put me in a real tough spot to find that next engineering job. But after a little while, I did get on with the Fortune 500 construction company that happened to have an energy consulting division. And I spent about 5 years there. And while I was there, based on my experience being unemployed, I made sure while I was there, I learned everything I possibly could. And I got on with a mentor there who taught me everything he could. And then I kind of got to the point where I'd hit a ceiling of growth there, both in the structure of the company and also the guy that was my mentor. There was only so much teaching and coaching he could do based on his background and experience.
I want to jump in on that real quick, because I love that you've identified mentor opportunities at each of your roles. And I think sometimes students and just young professionals don't even realize this, that there can be mentors within every organizational opportunity you pursue. I think you must be open to it. I think that's really critical. But the second thing you talked about was this idea of, you felt like you almost hit the ceiling of growth. Mm-hmm. How long were you there? How long did it take for you to realize, okay, I've hit the ceiling of growth. I don't know if this company can provide me with what I need to keep going in the direction I want to be going?
Sure. Probably about 4 years into that role. Well, let me think about this.
Had you received promotions along the way?
Yeah, that was the thing, is there was no structure for promotions. There was the vice president, there was 3, managers, and then there was a bunch of engineers that basically were all engineers. That's it. It was energy engineer. There wasn't senior, there wasn't different rankings. And so it was simply that there was no structure. They were proud of that at the time, that they called it a flat structure. But the problem for someone like me, who's a very driven individual, that flat structure concept just didn't work. It didn't give me opportunity for growth. And so that was, I identified that probably at 4 years, when I was like, wait a minute, I'm starting to get to where I'm one of the more senior people here in terms of experience, but I'm doing the same thing as the new guys, maybe with a little less supervision, but we're all doing the same thing, and there's no way for me to grow or change things. And I tried a few things. We tried to develop some new ways to go to market, some new revenue stream, stuff like that. And some of them were successful, others not so much. Bottom line, and this is the first thing that, when we get to talking about why to leave a company, it was a big Fortune 500 company, and you don't change or influence as a individual contributor. You don't change companies like that. It's difficult to have influence on a major company where you're just a number. So that was, and so I was there for about a year after that, when I realized not only was I not going to be able to grow professionally in terms of salary and position title, all those things because of the flat organization, but also, the guy I was, being led by, I had taken every bit of knowledge I could from him, and he had nothing left to give to me in that capacity. So
I want to jump in on that real quick because I think this is really interesting. This is a topic we brought up in other workshop guests before, where people say things like, "Oh, you should be you in the interview you should be asking about culture. What's your culture like?" But I think within that culture, baked into that is, what is the structure look like for promotional opportunities? I think that's a question not often asked by students and young professionals or just people in general. But I think it's a really critical question to ask, especially as it pertains to the culture and your own professional development, that, perhaps had you asked that ahead of time, maybe you would have been swayed one way or the other, but I would imagine, be really critical to know going into that.
yeah, absolutely. And I will say that, jumping ahead to where I am now, as I hire engineers all the time, I love to see when I've got someone that I'm interviewing that says, what's the learning curve like, or what's my growth path like, because they're already thinking ahead to that. And so they're aligning with kind of my mindset since, after I got into my career 5 or 6 years, they're already starting to think like that. So I love to see people start to think like that from the very beginning. That means they're invested. They're not just there for the job, they're invested in what that career path looks like for them, which means they're going to be more valuable to me, because the more they work to increase their value, the more value they are to me. And it's a symbiotic thing where, I can pay them more, and then they can work harder to get more valuable. And it's a back and forth thing where, value is recognized and continues to advance. So.
And I want to highlight this because this, I think, is a big misconception. I think it's it doesn't necessarily have to be a misconception. I think it's on a company by company basis, but the size of the company does not necessarily mean more or less structure. Like what you just described was a big Fortune 500 company, which, as you mentioned, was very flat, which could also be an indicator that they didn't have a lot of great structure in place for creating those advancement opportunities. Whereas your company is much smaller than that, but you're like, okay, great, we've got these different levels that you can hit as you work up. And even though you're in a relatively smaller company than a Fortune 500 company, it's great to know. And so I think for a lot of students, that is something you should probably be looking at when going through the vetting process of what kind of career or what kind of switching job, like what should I be considering? What are things that are ahead of me? That's pretty critical. And I think and if you haven't picked it up yet, Kit is on the work orientation triangle. He's career oriented. He's someone who's motivated by growth. He's not motivated by learning new skills. I know a lot of you all watching this are also career oriented too. And if that's the case, these tips are very relevant to you. And obviously, if you're job oriented or calling oriented, they're relevant as well. But I think, within the realm of what Kit's describing, I think is very poignant, because you don't want to be in a position where you feel like, I don't know where the roadmap goes of my own development.
Yeah. So after hitting as I said, hitting the growth ceiling there at that organization, I started looking for a new opportunity and landed with another publicly traded company that had a consulting services firm. So same work, just different structure in the way we took it to market. And really there is where my career clearly took off from where I was as just an individual contributor to being in leadership positions pretty much consistently from that point forward. And it was due to, again, from that mentor mentality, the regional vice president there. He recognized my work ethic and my passion and my drive, and he constantly, and a lot of that is, helped develop my leadership style now. He was constantly rewarding and working with me to continue growing that to where, I could continue to take on more and do more for the company. And that just really fit my style very well. And I don't think ever since that point forward have I slowed down in that constant development phase. But it took me to take the risk to get out of the organization that I had been in for 5 years and I was comfortable in, and move to something that I knew nothing about, and to take on basically a new mentor. So.
That's cool. And I know, because my relationship with you're an open book about this. And I'm genuinely curious, because I think this is going through the minds of a lot of students that are watching this right now. But when you made this switch, like compensation, was this more money at this new opportunity? Was it very clear that there was a very clear promotional path. Like, what about this new role made it explicitly clear that this would be different from your previous publicly traded company experience?
To begin with, it was an opportunity to take on a more senior role. And as I stated, we were, no matter the number of years, I mean, we were all at the same level, except for the 3 managers above. This was at the previous firm, and the vice president. Everybody was at the same level, and we had, I think, 16 engineers or something like that when I was there. So I was taking on, when I went over there, a senior role, and it was not anticipated in any way that, I wasn't yet starting to ask questions about what the growth path looked like, but so it wasn't anticipated. But I think I hit it off with the vice president at that first interview, and just had a gut feeling that he was going to be someone that I could work well with. And it turned out that, I think, so yes, it was a significant pay increase. It was maybe like 20%, but that is not why I took that. It was for the opportunity of growth. It was in a very, so in the don't want to get too much into the weeds on the engineering, but in the engineering I was in before, it was I'm an electrical engineer. It was a very mechanical oriented firm. This job that I was taking on was not only a senior role, but it was specific to electrical engineering stuff. So it was all about lighting and promoting and developing lighting projects. And so it gave me the opportunity to get into something niche, which I felt, I could carve out for myself, because even at that new firm that I was going to, the rest of the firm was mechanical engineers. I was the only electrical. So I was able to be unique and create a niche opportunity for myself in that. So, and from there, as things go with companies, some gal left, I got promoted to her job, another guy left, I got promoted to his job, and it just took off from there. So I think I was, at 20%, I got a 20% pay increase in leaving the previous firm and going to that one. And then within a year, I was up another 15%. And within, I think, 4 or 5 months of that, I was up another 20%. So I think more than double my salary in a period of 18 months. And that was all, finding that opportunity to grow, identifying a firm where I could grow.
That's really cool. I love that. I really appreciate you laying out the nuts and bolts. I think sometimes we're a little bit like hush hush about the compensation component of work. And I do think it's an important fact. I think it's for such a critical factor of people considering their next role, for how, sometimes from a societal perspective, we're so hush hush about that because, it's uncouth to talk about money. But I think it's a really critical factor. And I am so grateful that you outlined how important the growth factor was, because, I guess what I'd be curious, did you have other offers for more money, but you chose this one because there were of the growth opportunities?
Not at the time where I was making the move, but I will tell you, when I was making that transition, I read a book called Guerrilla Marketing for Job Hunters 3.0. It's written by a guy named David Perry. Highly recommend that as you start to develop how you're going to market yourself, because it changed not only how I marketed myself, but kind of my entire mentality of career path. And so through that, I always left the door open, in the roles that I had and the industries that I'm in, I constantly get phone calls from recruiter, and my response always when that call came, until the current role that I'm in, I'm dead set on staying where I am. But up until that point, it was always, my answer always was, I'm always open to a conversation. And it was incredible because not only did I grow my influence in terms of the people that I knew and the connections that I had, but I learned a lot about other companies and how they did things and what sort of doors were open. And there was a lot of learning that happened from just allowing myself to have conversations with recruiters, whether internal to companies or just a externally hired recruiter. Had a lot of interviews over the years. I was loyal and stayed put until, and I can highlight as I continue through this, the things that made me choose to leave, but I was always open to at least having a conversation and learning about new opportunities.
Well, I think that's really interesting that you mentioned that. And I think there's a really good way of looking at it. I think a lot of students / young professionals that are here, they might get that message on LinkedIn, or they get a contact from a recruiter and they think like, oh, this is really spammy, I'm not going to take this conversation, yada, yada, yada. But I think what you're showing is, if you're always open to a conversation, you're just going to learn something. You may learn, and you likely will learn, that this role is not for you. And if that's the case, great. But you can learn a whole lot. And I think, you can also learn a lot about your value in the marketplace. There's a lot of recent LinkedIn articles coming out that's saying like how unaware professionals are as to what adequate or accurate compensation is for them within their roles, because they stick within the same organization for an extended period of time, and they don't chat with any other recruiters or any other companies is about like what other kind of compensation might look like. And I know from a business leadership perspective, we're not necessarily saying like, oh yeah, go out and find out.
Yeah,
like,
I gotta be careful to tell my guys, yeah, you should be talking. No, we don't.
yeah, no, but
Except for if you work for me, you don't talk to anybody.
perfect. Yeah, that's exactly it. But from a student's perspective and a young professional's perspective here, I think knowing what is out there is knowledge is power, and that can help you leverage potentially a raise or garner new opportunities. So just learn what's out there. Yeah, I think that's really cool.
Yeah, and the worst time to try to develop a network of recruiters and individuals that you know is when you actually want to move and start a job, right? That takes a long time to make that happen. The other thing that is interesting about doing that and always being open to that is you earn interview skills, right? I know that, everybody, when you're going through college and stuff, people talk about, do practice interviews and all that, mock interviews and stuff like that. Well, there's nothing like having a real interview on a regular basis. Because you get good at that. You get good at having those conversations, and you have to very quickly develop a relationship with the person on the other side of the table and figure out what's valuable to them and be able to craft your answers based on, what they want to hear,
That's so
what's
true.
valuable to them.
It's so funny you say that, because that's so true. And and I don't want to call it necessarily sales, but you're selling yourself for why you should be considered a hire for this role. And I know one of the biggest things that I learned just from doing so many different sales calls was when I really needed a deal badly was when I was the worst at my sales. But when it was, hey, if we can add you in, we can add you in. If you don't want to do it, it's cool. I added so much more business because I was, if you want to join us, great. If you don't, it's cool. Like, it's almost like I think the statement is, the person who can win a negotiation is the one that can walk away. And if you're in a very good position where you can pretty easily walk away, you don't reek of desperation anymore. You're not lingering. You're not, saying like, so when will I hear back from you? Like, how will I, all these other things. It's more around the, okay, you know what? If you got an offer for me, fantastic. I'll consider it. And, if I determine it's a fit, I'll determine if it's a fit. And, if not, okay, no worries.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on from there, there was, the vice president that hired me at some point moved on as well. And, there were some corporate leadership changes, and I took on a role of leading basically the Northern California division, and was reporting then to corporate leadership. And in that chain, at the same time, there was changes at corporate leadership. And I got to a point where I was feeling undervalued and overworked. I mean, at the time I was working 7 days a week, and I had an hour or 2 hours, 2 to 3 hours daily commute, round trip to the office. On the weekends, it wasn't as bad, but it was an hour and a half each way during the week. And so working 12-hour days with 3 hours of commuting, it just got rough. My kids were, waking up when I wasn't there and going to bed without me there, and I wasn't present in their lives or my wife's life. So, had a meeting. They basically made it very clear that they wanted me to work more regardless. And that was the point in time where I decided it was time to leave that company. And within 24 hours, I had a new job and moved on to my next gig. Joined
real quick, when you put in your notice to leave that company, did they make any concessions? Were they like, oh my gosh, kid, like, we'll give you the balance you need, or what was that like? I've seen some companies get interesting when all of a sudden you're like, hey, I'm leaving, here's my notice.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. But the moment they started talking about that, I shut it down. I am, and this is in some of the other questions that you had asked me, when I thought through them, I had framed some answers around this, but I might as well talk about it now. I am adamant, both in my role as leader of this company and in my role as an employee previously, this idea of, counter offers and all that stuff, it doesn't work out well for anybody in the long run. The employer gets to feel a little bit of resentment towards the employee who basically got them, used an offer from another firm to get more money out of them. And ultimately, and I'll get to this in a little bit, it's all about culture. Never did I leave a company because I wanted more money. So them offering me more money or more vacation time, the reality is I could never use because I was working too much. It wouldn't have solved the problems of the culture that demanded that of me. That culture would still exist, even if for a while they eased up and they're like, Kit needs some time. Then they're treating me like they're treating me with kid gloves, and ultimately it's going to go right back to the thing. That's a culture of the company, and ultimately that is what. When we go through this whole thing, that's what I'm going to argue the reason you leave a company. When the culture is not a fit or is no longer a fit, or there's a change in the culture, it is not, to me, ever about money. There is typically going to be a financial gain to making that move, but it is not going to be, it should not typically be the ultimate motivating factor. And I've never seen it be that. I've read plenty of leadership books, and even as I formed, looking back over my career here, never once was it for money. So.
That's really interesting. I love that perspective. And that's a really fascinating, yeah, I mean, because you're right. If you're going back and you're creating counter offers and this and that, it's like this company for the most part is probably fully thought through what they could reasonably offer to garner ROI from this role. And they've got, if they lack perspective as to what somebody else in this role could or can be doing, even if you come in and just blow the doors off of the role and you do amazing, if they don't have any other perspective to have a baseline off of your performance versus somebody else's performance, they're always going to feel like you're the person we gave that extra 10 or 15 or 20% to. And, they're always going to be looking at you under the magnifying glass. And, yeah, you don't want to be in a situation like that. And I loved your point about the balance part, because that company, you're so right. And I've seen this happen again and again. It's almost like an abusive relationship where you get this person, they don't have work-life balance. They get an offer somewhere else. The company, they say, hey, here's my notice. The company says, no, we'll give you the balance. We'll pay you more with all these things, but please don't leave us. And then they stay. And then the company is like, let me do the ratchet back up again. And then all of a sudden they're working those hours like they were before. And it's not ideal. It's not conducive. And so that's really great advice.
Yeah. So when I made the choice to move on, I moved on to it was a mechanical contracting firm that was looking to, or not mechanical contractor they were a union shop. They were looking to, they always had the term energy services in their business name, but they had never acted on it. So I had developed a relationship with the owner and CEO, and I said, hey, called him up. I said, hey, you want to have lunch on a Saturday? And he said, yep. And he basically gave me an offer right there at lunch.
Holy moly.
And I was brought on to essentially grow that part of their business. Did very well, was only there for about a year. Ultimately, it was a thing where the owner had this vision for what was going to happen, and his partner and the guy that ran the engineering part, who had to essentially take my concept designs and put them on the paper and get them permitted and built and all that stuff. He didn't really have an interest in it. So he wouldn't ever, I'd sell a project, $3 million or whatever. And it was so far down on his back burner that customers would ultimately walk away from the project. And part of my compensation was commission. And so basically, and the reason I left this firm was because the full company wasn't committed to this idea of what I was providing. They were limiting my ability to make money and provide for my family. And so I thought, hey, it's time to move on. And at that point, I chose to start up my own firm, do what I'd been doing for other people for so long. And I was able to do it from home and be there with my wife and kids and work according to my schedule. And it was great. And Garrett, the challenges that come with running your own business. You are the seller, you are the doer, you are every aspect of everything. And so there are challenges too. But I was doing very well. And then I had a major customer back out of a 7-year contract that would have basically kept me full-time employed, or, my company full-time busy, just taking care of them, because they were in a financial situation that made them lay off 4,000 employees. So instead, they couldn't lay off 4,000 employees and then turn around and continue investing in their buildings. And so they backed out of that contract. And at that point in time, my decision was to continue doing that, moonlighting per se. And I did well with that for a little while longer, another year or so. But I joined an electrical contracting firm. The entire intent at this is the only time I ever took a job with the full intention of leaving. So it was a stepping stone for me to make sure I had consistent money coming in, income coming in, and work towards, at the time I was living in California, but I was born and raised in Idaho, and I wanted to return there. So it was a stepping stone to develop skills that I had looked and identified that I did not have, that I would need in order to go to work for an engineering firm back here in Boise, Idaho. And ultimately I developed those skills there. I did very well and was able to, after about 12 months, get on with the firm I'm on now. I've done very well here as well. I was hired as just an electrical engineer, moved up to be the electrical engineering department manager, now up to vice president and the primary engineer record for the firm. So had a lot of success here. Glad I took those steps, but I really believe that every step I took along my career, I look back now and I learned something, and I took everything I could from every company. And now I come to this small company in Boise, Idaho, and I have skills and I've observed things that allow me to contribute here at a very high level for a company that's never had anybody that's worked at, the third biggest company in the world and whatnot. So, that bottom line, that would be the number one recommendation for me. Take everything you can and learn everywhere you are. Never stop learning, because that's how we keep growing and building our, value to companies and everything, creating new good opportunities for ourselves. It's a constant learning process. And that's how I got to where I am. That's where I am now. And I don't know.
That's cool. That's awesome. When you went into that one company, when you said there's the only company I ever took a job where I had the intention that I was going to leave eventually, did they know that? Were they cool with that? Like, how did that go?
Well, it was a role that wasn't necessarily ever like, long-term role for anybody. So I don't think they would have, I didn't go in advertising, obviously, that this is my intention. But at the same time, I did very well for them. I provided, something that no one else they had hired in that role could before, because I'm a licensed electrical engineer. So there were things that I could provide that they didn't have. And, they were getting it for a steal, because I wasn't asking for a salary that would go with me serving as an electrical engineer of record. So I think it was a mutually beneficial situation where no one was, all in necessarily. They weren't all in paying me what they were asking me to do, but I didn't push to get more, because I didn't have any intention of making it, I didn't know how long it would be. It was until I landed basically this job. That it was just, it was a mutually beneficial, intended breakup, if you will.
Sure. I know a lot of students, I've loved your story. This has been super easy and super fascinating. I would imagine a lot of students may have their own insecurities where they feel like, oh, I don't want to be the fake it till you make it type of person. But like, if you want to constantly learn, you have to a little bit fake it till you make it. What are your thoughts on this whole notion of like fake it till you make it as it pertains to a consistent learning process and protocol?
Well, what I would say is I don't think I've ever applied for a position where I had all the qualifications on the roles and responsibility. Never. And I don't think anybody should, because if you're not growing, you're not advancing yourself, and you're not providing your best to your employer either. We always have to be growing. And if you're choosing a job that you're fully qualified for, then it's not the right job for you, quite frankly. So that, I don't know if that answers the question, but I think you've constantly got to be looking for opportunities that push the limits of what you have the skills. And I suppose you should evaluate, what are the things I like to do, and where can I find opportunities that push the skills of the things that I like to do and the things that I don't like to do. That's the reality of my job right now. I get to do the things I love and delegate the things that I don't like so much. So
I love to ask the students a question real quick. Post in the comment section. Well, what are the things that you like to do, and what are the things that maybe you don't like as much? Post in the comment section. I think just like taking time to mentally work through that, putting it down either on paper in the comment section, I think that could be a really cool and great and beneficial exercise to work through. So
yeah,
Yeah, go ahead, Kit.
Yeah, I just want to throw in there that I've been reading a lot of books lately by John C. Maxwell about leadership and stuff. And one of the things that I've found very fascinating, and I'm trying to wrap my head around even as I lead my young engineers out here, is develop a skill for identifying what you're good at, and try to make yourself better at that, and not necessarily spend all your time focusing on the things that you're bad at, because that doesn't help an employer. And that's what I have to do as a leader out here, is I have to identify which engineer is good at this piece of the work and which engineer is good at this piece, and develop them more in those skill sets, but delegate them to do the things that they're good at, because that makes us more efficient, that makes them better, rather than, I think, it's been a really interesting concept that I got to finish wrapping my head around, but this idea that why spend all our time focusing on the things we're bad at.
I love it. Yeah, it's I feel like I've heard a couple of sayings around that. Like, if you're gonna take the island, burn the ships. Or like, I think Will Smith, as like an actor, said, don't focus on your plan B, only on your plan A. Because if you mentally say, oh, well, if this doesn't work out, I can do this as a backup, you are gonna use that as a handicap. Whereas if you don't give yourself that backup, you're gonna invest in those strengths that you've got. And so you'd rather be, if I'm hearing you right, you'd rather be the expert in the handful of things that you are fantastic in, that you really love doing, than be mediocre in everything.
Yeah. I don't think you could ever say I'm not going to ever do that, especially, as a young, person coming into the workforce. But, you can't say I'm never going to do that because I don't like it or I'm not good at it. But at the same time, I wouldn't put all your effort into fixing that thing. I would put your effort into continuing to advance the things you're good at and making sure you're capable at the things that you're not.
That's cool. Kid, this has been a great recording. This has been awesome. I feel like we've just answered your story, and going through that has been really cool and fascinating. And I feel like I've learned so much just from your perspective about when is the right time to pursue new roles. What do I need to do? What do I need to be thinking about? Like, how does compensation play into that? And I think the fact that you did it through narrative form was really engaging and interesting. I guess I'd love to end this with a couple of questions. One, any final tips or suggestions for students or young professionals as they consider pursuing new roles?
Yeah, I think bottom line, I narrowed this down to 3 things, and we didn't talk through a lot of the other questions, so some of this may be a little out of context, and I'll try to fill in the holes where I can. But as you consider new roles, evaluate your contributions to your company, because if you're leaving a company because you're unhappy, you might need to consider where you fit in that. I've had people work for me that are like, oh, I'm not happy here. Well, you also, you might not be happy because you're not fitting into the culture because you're not embracing it, or where you have a culture of accountability and making sure that we're all contributing and we're all carrying our weight. If you're not doing that, you might not feel good, because none of your peers are going to like you when I'm expecting them to carry their weight and you're not. You're not going to fit in relationally with your peers, nor are you going to get the promotions and the pay increases and stuff like that. So evaluate yourself first before you put it all on your company or your boss or whoever it is. It may very well be that culture of the company, and you may have a bad boss, but at the end of the day, you look in the mirror first and make sure that you're putting all your effort in to make it a fit for you.
I love that. That's like a great just notion and introspection and self-awareness. There's just a sidebar. There's this really funny Saturday Night Live skit with Adam Sandler. It's one of the newer ones, but he is essentially the owner of a tour guide company, and they do Italian tours from the United States. And what he's trying to convey is like, welcome, we're going to take you to Italy. We'll go to Venice. We'll go to Florence. We'll go to Rome. But I want to remind you, you are still you when you're in Italy. If you're an unhappy person at home, Italy is not going to all of a sudden make you a happy person.
Yeah,
if your
absolutely.
marriage is in shambles at home, going to Italy is not going to automatically fix your marriage.
Yeah.
So it's a really funny bit. I highly recommend watching it. But I think the whole point is, to your point, introspection. Look in the mirror. If something's not working the way you want, what can you take accountability for?
So the next piece is that if you've determined that it is the culture, because I believe that no matter if it's a bad boss or even if you're feeling undervalued, and so you may be equating that to pay, no matter what that cultural piece is about the company that you're working for. For me, it was, I was working too much. I felt undervalued, those type of things. I didn't have a growth opportunity. Whatever that cultural piece is that's making you unhappy at work, make sure you identify it so that as you're starting to interview, because I think when we go and interview with companies, we're interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing us, right? If you're thinking about it the right way, they're fighting for you to come to work for them too. Make sure that you understand the cultural pieces that matter to you and that are making you unhappy at your job, so that you can ask your future employers or potential future employers about those things and how they handle those things. It's different for all of us. I've got people that work for me that just want to do the 8 to 5 and go home. Whereas that wouldn't work for me. I want to have something that drives me to be bigger than that 8 to 5 piece of my professional development. And so, whatever that is for you, identify it, figure it out. And it's self-reflection, as you said, so that you can go to the next employer and say, hey, how do you guys handle this? What are your thoughts on working more than 40 hours a week? What are your thoughts on working more than 60 hours a week, and so on.
That's cool. That's awesome.
And then the last piece is avoid jumping ship too quickly, or most importantly for me, as I look to hire people, is in a predictable or identifiable manner. I don't know how many times I've got very young engineers that want to come to work for me, and I can look at their resume and see, okay, he was 12 months at every job for the past 5 years, or he was 18 months, or he was 2 years, or whatever it is. It's almost to the point where I looked at a kid that was hired before me here. I looked at his resume and saw he was 2 years at every job. And when I got into the leadership role, I mentioned to the management, I said, hey, this employee has been at every firm he's been at for 2 years, and we're coming right up on 2 years, which means we've got to be careful. So we tried to ultimately kind of make sure we invested in him and talked with him, making sure he was happy and everything. And he said he was all good. And we made some adjustments where he wasn't. And ultimately he left. A couple months later, he left exactly at that 2 year mark, on the dot. So make sure that if you feel you need to go, that you don't create a pattern that people like myself that are looking to hire you can see, because I'm sorry, when I see that, I'm like, yeah, I'll probably ask you some questions during the interview, but it's going to make me very nervous because ultimately an employee, when they hire you, they are investing in you. They're going to spend a lot of time bringing you up to speed and teaching them what they have to know. That is an investment that they can't waste. And so if they're hiring you to think about, they're only going to be good for 12 months, that's not a sound investment, and they're likely not to make it. So be careful about creating a pattern that can be identified on your resume. Or if there's a reason, you moved, or, you got laid off or whatever, make sure you have an explanation that's not just, I wasn't happy at my job, or, that's not going to help you either.
Love it. No, this is great advice. These are great tips. Hey, Kit, this is fantastic. How can our audience learn more about you? Are you okay with them connecting with you on LinkedIn? I know a lot of our students are on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
Cool. That's awesome. Kit, thanks for being here. This has been great. This has been a really great workshop. Students, thank you all for being here. I look forward to seeing you at our next workshop. Have a great rest of your evening.